Hi, everyone. Welcome to Behavioral Strategies, Approaches and Techniques for Special Learners in Musical Environments. My name is Brian Wagner-Yeung, and I am the NYSMA, the New York State School Music Association Special Learners Chair. In addition to that, I am a special education music teacher for the New York City Department of Education, mainly where I work with students who are on the autism spectrum or students who have intellectual disabilities. And lastly, I am a music education consultant. Our focus for this short session is what kinds of tools and strategies can we incorporate to teach and allow our students to showcase appropriate behaviors? How can we build strategies for students to generalize into real life situations and scenarios? And how can music be used as a tool to teach appropriate behavior? So one of the things, obviously, our focus for this session is behavior. And one of the things we really just need to do is talk about what are the factors that really determine a student's behavior. Some of these things that influence our behaviors that we might see in our classrooms is the lack of ability to communicate, lack of understanding of a task that may be asked, sensory needs, anxiety, having a difficult home life, needing more structure, or even needing tasks broken down more in the classroom, needing specific individualized plans, learned helplessness, copying behavior, whether that's from other adults or peers, attention-seeking behavior, and escape of activity or work. When we're talking about behaviors, oftentimes we're really looking at the behavior. We're thinking, why is this happening? But really what we need to do is we need to take a step back and realize that behavior has a function. All behaviors, and for all of our students, have a function. We really need to take a step back and think about why are they doing this? What function does it serve? And what are they achieving at the end? And most important, what I want you to take away from this is whatever behaviors we are seeing or we're focusing on with our students in our classroom, all behavior is communication. Our students are communicating something to us. And in the moment, that may seem frustrating and it may not seem that way, but for some of our students, if we're going back to those basic functions, they're communicating something. It's us to figure out what are they communicating and how do we redirect that and give them the strategies to find an alternative way to communicate. Lastly, you'll notice that I wrote behavior is a social construct and there is no clear consensus of what constitutes good or bad behavior. I included this quote because I found it to be powerful because really we need to think about what is good and bad behavior. There really is no definition. All behavior is different. And for all of our students, we have students coming from different cultures and different backgrounds, and everything that we do is different. And some things that we may be find acceptable, other people may not. So we really just need to, in the back of our minds, remember that behavior is communication. So one of the things that when we're talking about behaviors, we might hear is what's called PBIS, the Positive Behavior Intervention Support. And here, this is the PBIS pyramid. The PBIS train of thought is that pretty much 80% of our population of students, which represents the green part of the triangle, will pretty much focus or will work with universal interventions. These are the basic strategies that we're incorporating in our classroom, such as strong classroom management, routines, and stuff like that. The next group is the 15% of our students who are in that yellow category. Those are the students that need some more individualized support or plans. And lastly, we have 5% of the population, that red tip part of the triangle. Those are the students that are going to have behavior intervention plans in their IEPs. They might have a crisis paraprofessional and will have those approaches and techniques that are written by other teams. So primarily what we're going to be focusing on is the green and the yellow group. So for the green level students, a lot of the behavior issues that we may see in our classroom can easily be incorporated by clear and structured classroom management, pacing, and routines. When we're talking about rules in our classroom, I work with a lot of my student teacher and we work with developing rules. One of the things I tell them is we want to have clear and consistent rules. Consistent is key. We all have students that sometimes we let things slide for, but our students are watching and we need to be consistent. So we need to have clear and realistic consequences for when a reel is broken. When we're putting our rules up in our classroom, they should be short, clear, and in a visible space for our students to see. My train of thought is that rules should be 3 words or less. The more words that you add, the more opportunity there is for misinterpretation or for your students to find that wiggle room. But also, we want to think about the visibility of where you're placing your rules. If you're working in a kindergarten class where you are on the rug all the time, you want your rules lower down so where your students can see them. If you're in a high school class where your students are sitting at desks, obviously you can have them higher up on the walls. You can also have visuals that are connected to what rules you are showing. A lot of our students are visual learners, and sometimes they may need to see a picture to understand what am I being asked to do. We also want to think about the procedures that we have in our classroom. Rules and procedures are a little bit different. Rules are the expectations that we have. Procedures are pretty much the process of how we get from one area or one activity to the next. As music teachers, I think sometimes we have a little bit of a harder time with this because we tend to have more activities than you would find in a math class or in an ELA class. We have more transitions that are happening. If you're in an instrumental program, you're having your students go and get set up, bring their instruments back, move around, then also have cleanup. In a general music classroom, you're having the same thing. You might have students on the rugs, students going to get their recorders, students going to ORF instruments. Those are procedures that we have to teach. How do we get from one location to the other? How do we clean up one area? So those are a little bit different, but we need to really break those down and teach everything in smaller chunks for our students to be able to understand what we want them to do. So this is an example of some visual rules that I have in my own classroom. You'll notice that each of them are 3 words or less, and I also have a visual paired to show them what the expectation is. These visuals are coming from Mayor Johnson's Boardmaker. For some of your students, you may want to use Google Images or more realistic images. It depends on your population and what your students connect and are more relatable to. This was just another visual. You may see sometimes in elementary classrooms, teachers might have a chart where students use those pins to kind of move up and down. This is the same kind of process, just using a guitar and keeping everything more in musical terms. For me, my premise is that students can only move in the positive direction. I never bring students back down. For me, I think that defeats the purpose of teaching replacement behaviors. We always want to keep things positive and motivating. For teaching procedures, I might have visuals showing them this is what it looks like when we're doing something. For me as a teacher, when I'm in the building, I have to transition my classes a lot of the times to the cafeteria to lunch or picking them up for breakfast from breakfast or to recess. So some of my classes, they have a hard time lining up. So I show them this is what it looks like to line up, giving them that visual support. In addition to that, we want to incorporate routines and schedules. All of our students, not even just our special education, all of our students respond better when there is structure. They respond better when there is a consistent routine that always follows the same schedule. For my classroom, I always follow the same schedule. We always start with our hello song, followed by this activity, followed by this activity. My students always know the order of what the sequence is. The only thing that changes is the music that we're working on, but the actual routine never changes. You also want to plan your structure carefully. Not all of our classes are the same. Some of our students may need breaks in the middle of their activity. If you're doing a high energy music activity, you might need to follow that with a low energy calming activity. And pacing is important for a lot of our learners. Some of our students might be only able to process a certain amount of information and may need a break for them to regulate, be able to come back. So that might be where you may need timers for your students. So this is just an example of a visual schedule that I have hanging in my classroom. After each activity is done, so for example, when our hello song is done, it goes into the finish folder. For some of my students, I might actually have them be the calendar helper because they may need to actually touch the actual calendar to be in charge of it for them to understand this activity is finished. Now we're moving on to the next one. Lastly, I might also incorporate different types of items or manipulatives to help our students self-regulate. So we often hear the term fidget toys, but for some of our students, especially if you're working with students on the autism spectrum, some of our students may just need to hold different types of items while they're in the classroom just to help them regulate. So using fidget toys, sensory items, weighted items, again, just incorporating visuals. Some students might need specific visuals for them to understand what the expected task or behavior is. But For then that 15% of our population, those basic procedures that we're giving our students may not be enough. So we may have to go a little bit deeper and make it more individualized. So we may be, again, dealing with a behavior that our students are trying to communicate, and we just want to replace that behavior with a new one. So here are some of the strategies that we do to help replace it. First, we want to work with the school community. We want to reach out to the classroom teachers, special education teachers. If you have powers or teaching assistants coming in, work with them. They're with their students all day long. They can tell you, oh, this is what the classroom teacher is doing. This is what we're seeing in other classrooms that may or may not be working. You may also want to reach out to other arts teachers. Sometimes our kids are just really excited by our classes and they just can't navigate that. So maybe it's just because they're just excited and it's happening in all the specialty areas. You also want to keep parents in the know with this. Sometimes parents can give you the information, this worked at home, this is what we're doing, and it translates over. Anything that we're doing, we want to work with our whole community because we want our students eventually to generalize, which means take that skill and apply it into multiple settings. So after that, we're going to start taking actual data on the behavior that's happening in the class. So there's two different ways that we can do this. The first type of way is what we call a scatter plot. A scatter plot is a kind of chart, it's a grid that I find it to be the easiest way of taking data. It doesn't really take any time. You kind of just have it placed next to you, you teach your lesson, and you just check off each time that a behavior occurs. When you keep taking data on any type of behavior, you need to do this for multiple times. You will not get clear data from one or two music sessions. You at least need 2 or 3 weeks of data because you need to go back and compare and contrast what you're collecting data on. So this is an example of a scatter plot that I've had in my classroom. As mentioned, because I follow the same exact schedule in each class, my scatter plot follows my schedule. And I just literally check off how many times each behavior occurs during a specific activity. You'll also notice that I included intensity. For sometimes with specific behaviors, they may have a range. So for example, if it's touching other students, for a level 1, they may be touching themselves aggressively, where level 3, they're hitting peers or staff. So you may also have to define that intensity. But the scatter plot can give you, at the end, a clear consensus that, oh, maybe the behavior is only occurring during singing or during our group work. That gives you an idea of something's happening during that time. Next, what we do is we want to take what's called anecdotals, or the ABCs. For an anecdotal, it's a chart that's literally written as ABC. The antecedent is what happened before behavior, what triggered it. Sometimes this is where you might want to get your paraprofessionals or teaching assistants involved, because sometimes they can see what's happening. Oftentimes, and I will admit it, sometimes I'm the trigger and I don't even notice it. Maybe I'm giving attention to a behavior where it's attention seeking when I should just be ignoring it, and I'm not aware of that. Sometimes maybe it's a peer in the classroom just doing something simple. Maybe it's even a light flickering in the classroom. We want to see what's happening before the behavior. B is what is the exact behavior. And this needs to be clearly defined. What did we actually see happened? And C, what is the consequence? What is the result of the behavior? When we say consequence, we're not meaning punishment. Consequence means what happened after. Were they spoken to? Were they given something as a reward to redirect them? We want to know, because sometimes, well, always, the A and the C are why the behavior is occurring. It's either what's happening before that's triggering it, or sometimes the C, the consequence, is the result of the behavior. They're looking for that result. And that's a lot of the times where that attention-seeking behavior comes in. So this is just an example of what an ABC chart would look like. Just like a scatter plot, you're going to need multiple days of data to fill this in to see where the overlap is. The next step is to analyze it and then gradually create a plan. So these are some of the types of plans that you can help create, individualize for your students. This is what's called a first then chart. This is a primary level of visual. First, you sit down, then you are rewarded with a goldfish. First, you keep your hands down, then you get this. So for your primary level students, it's just first they do something, then they get this. You can use a timer for this. This could work maybe every 3 minutes for your students. Every student is different. You're going to kind of have to see what works for them. When you're talking about what they're going to be rewarded with also, you want to use the highest level motivator. If it's something that's not motivating for them, why are they going to do it? So you want to use something that is the highest level they really want to work for. And gradually with all of these, the goal is to eventually fade them. For some of your students, they may always need this, and that's okay. You're just giving them the tools to be successful. This is just another example. For this student, first you sit down, then you get to hold the koosh ball. This is what's called a token chart. So it's just a little bit broader. First, you're sitting down, hands down, and quiet mouth. For some of your students, you may only have one expectation. For this student, they had 3 expectations. On the back of the chart, they had a separate amount of tokens. So usually I do 5 tokens. And again, this could last the entire class period. This may be timed. So maybe it's every 2 minutes they earn a token, and then gradually you want to increase the time. In this example, you'll actually see that I put a timer on the token chart. This student's highest reinforcement was the iPad, so they had to do these expectations for 8 minutes. For with this student, every time they got off task, if they stood up and started wandering around, what I would do is I would just pause the timer and say, timer's paused until you're ready. I would not take any tokens away. Sometimes you might see teachers or other staff threaten to take a token away. That is actually counterproductive to what we want to do. Again, we always want to keep things positive. We always want to encourage them. If you wind up really being able to develop token systems in your class and you find that they're working, I haven't done this, but I have seen other teachers that have developed menu style token systems. If you earn 5 tokens, that highest reinforcement is the iPad. But let's say you only earn 4 tokens, what's the next highest reinforcement down? So even if you only earn 1 token, you're still earning something. This way it's always positive, but it's broken up because we really want to get them to that high 5. Checklists also might be needed into our class. So some of our students, they just need things broken down. So in this example, this was just a checklist teaching them, how do I come in and set up my orchestra instrument on my own? For some of my students, they may not be readers. I can do the same thing just using visuals. Same exact checklist, they just check it off when they're done. And for some of our students, if they're not, even if this is too much, you can actually take pictures of each step for them to see what it looks like. This was an individualized schedule that some of our students just need, and you'll notice it's very specific. For example, in step number 2, walk to the rug and sit in a brown chair. This student was told in his schedule what type of chair he's sitting in, because when I left it open-ended, he was sitting in a teacher's rolly chair and he was rolling around. And by that point, we couldn't get him out because I didn't break it down enough. We're working for 30 minutes with a quiet voice. We're defining what the expectations are. But lastly, music can be the reinforcement. Music can be useful in helping our students shape their behavior into positive ways. Text in the song can be used to help students and draw comparison to their own life situations. And musical genres in history and cultures can be incorporated for students to realize that their own struggles can be connected to well-known music. So a lot of the repertoire and activities that we're using can help replace new and appropriate behaviors for our students. So again, we're not talking about getting rid of behaviors, we're talking about replacing them because behaviors are communication. So for example, some of our students who may struggle with turn taking or sharing, call and response songs are the perfect way to teach that. Some of our students who may struggle with language, we could use singing, syllables, fill in the words. You're getting them to use their language more and more through music making so they can generalize using actual language in sentences and scenarios. We can use repertoire to teach different types of emotions. A lot of our students, sometimes they just don't have control of their emotions. So let music teach them. When I feel angry, here's something I can do to calm me down. For example, I've used the blues to teach that. I've had my students compose their own blues lyrics. When I feel angry, I do this. This makes me happy, blah, blah, blah. So you're giving them that coping mechanism. And using music as a tool to seek appropriate behaviors. So some of our students, we may sing rather than speak. Some of our students, we may use rhythms or create signals in the codes in the classroom. I know this is a pretty old pattern, but I know you've probably still seen it in classrooms, maybe in your school, that's a musical symbol that is saying it's time for attention. So may not use that exact pattern, but still using some types of rhythms to create some sort of signal. And lastly, allowing student repertoire choices to be included. We want student choice in there. A lot of time when their choice and their input is involved, some of the behaviors already decrease there because they feel that they're being part of the decision making. So as mentioned, we want to incorporate music that the students are interested in, and that's important to them. If they're listening to pop music at home, we're going to incorporate pop music. We're going to use that as a tool and then branch out from there. We want them to feel that their opinions and cultures are important and valued. We want our students to have the opportunity to showcase their own musical styles and cultures. So if you have students who are listening to their own type of cultural music at home, let them showcase it. For example, right now with my remote students, we're listening to music, and one of the moms actually came on. We were listening to something, and she said, "I'm so excited that you're playing Algerian music because that's part of their culture." And they were just so excited, and it brought them in, and it made them feel important, even the family feel important. And lastly, you'll see at the bottom, that's why this is coming from the words of Dr. Connie McCoy, using the familiar to discover the unknown. Always use what's familiar to our kids and then branch out from there. We also want to incorporate music that teaches calming down and coping mechanisms. So as mentioned earlier, if you have high energy activities, follow it with something calm. I've even used yoga music before. Sometimes when we're transitioning and we're cleaning up from an activity, I'll put yoga music on just to kind of help regulate that emotion before they transition out. We can incorporate behavioral tools through useful repertoire. Sometimes our students still get frustrated and agitated, so use music to calm them. So I hope this was useful. As mentioned, the most important thing I want you to take away from this is that behavior is communication. There's so many things we can do to break things down and give our students individualized support, but even in addition to that, we could use our own subject, music making, to help replace our behaviors that our students may be showcasing and allowing them to generalize them into real world settings. Thank you.